All right, team, this is a good one today. We're going to work on building our own, basically our own starter kit. We're going to use the Tamagui starter kit as a base, and then we're going to add in our own auth, and we're going to add in tRPC so that we have something that's custom to us. There are a couple of other starter kits out there, but they have different auth mechanisms and platforms that we want to use. But I want to use Kinde, so we built one. The starter kit will use Kinde, it will use tRPC, and it will use Tamagui. So let's jump in. I'll give you a little bit of explanation on all the other things as we move through. All right, so one of the requirements that I had was using a platform that we could use an auth system that we could use cross-platform. So we need to be able to log in on the web, native. So React Native. Now, unfortunately, Next.js does not work across platform. It only works in web. So we have to shift our auth from Next.js into something that supports it. So that moving into that, it could be Auth 0, it could be Clerk, it could be Supabase, and then I found another one called Kinde, which is a new startup from Australia. So I actually went through and I looked at all of these ones, and I actually built code for every single one of these. We also looked at pricing. So, the big boy in the room, Auth 0, is quite expensive. When you start scaling up, like where we work in enterprise land, we're talking $2 plus per user. Obviously, that does come down as you have more users, but it can also sting you. A lot of people have been stung by this. If you build out a startup like my 4x4, where they're not going to be, the users don't pay for this thing, you could have, like we've already got over 500 users. It just keeps growing. You have 10,000 users. Now you're paying a lot of money just to have someone log in. So that's not really something we want to get ourselves stuck into. Supabase by far is the cheapest. Unfortunately, at the time of recording, I don't know if it's mature enough to be used in output for what we want to do. I had a lot of trouble getting it running. Tried out Clerk as well. But then found Kinde, like I mentioned, which is like, I think it's 1 cent per monthly active user, bargain. So I'll pull up their website. So 1 second, there we go. So you can see here, free 7,500 monthly active users. So you can build a pretty good platform on that for free, nothing, cost you nothing. Then you move into Pro. And so, sorry, it's not 1 cent per user, it's 1.75 cents per user after 1,000. And you pay $25 a month. And the really cool thing about these guys are, they have a Slack channel and they get involved. You ask them a question and they will be there, the founders jumping in, answering questions. I've actually already committed 2 PRs to them just to, make certain customizations that we needed for migrating from Next.js, but a really cool platform. And what they're also doing is a few other nice things. So they're not just an auth platform, they're actually building for little things that you need for running a business. So they've got feature flags built in, and they're busy working on rolling out billing. So they can actually have a billing platform built in here, so you can just plug into it and start charging, which I'm really excited for, to see what that looks like. So that's Kinde, right? That's our auth. So evaluated Supabase, Clerk, Auth 0, which I've used a lot, very mature and works for everything. It definitely does work. It's the easiest to implement. But the cost is insane, like $2 a user. Let's call it $1 a user. If you could manage to negotiate it down, you just can't afford that once you start scaling. And then also, if you look at pricing here, you're capped out at 10,000. Then after that, you have to move into enterprise. So that's just not something, like we'll hit 10,000. I want to hit 10,000 users before, let's say, July next year. We're going to then get into big boy time and just not be able to afford it. Especially when you're not generating money yet. And I think I did the math, and we're talking about that 100 grand a year to where we want to be. Just in Auth just does not seem worth it. So yeah, Supabase is really good. They are like by far the cheapest platform. Not as good as these guys yet. Not as, because they're not. I guess they're not. It's not their main focus. They are working on it, and bet you it's going to be awesome in 6 months to a year. But right now, when we want to do this migration, just not there yet. And did try Clerk, but yeah, the flow for me, I couldn't get past the Facebook login. If there was a user had no email, it just said sorry, it doesn't work. So that was a massive blocker. When you log in with a Facebook account with no email, it will automatically ask the user to enter their email. It will send an email to them, get them to validate that, and then you know that email works. So that piece for me was the clincher, and that's what got me to consider this one. So that's kind of a quick run through of the auth. So let's have a look now at the guys we know. We work with every single day, but I'll just quickly run through them. So the other one, obviously, that we've been using a lot in my 4x4 is tRPC. So just to give you, I guess one of the reasons why we are going to stick with this, because it's a good time for us now to evaluate and see, do we want to keep using this? Because as the app scales, do we want to use a monorepo? Do we want to have the server and the front end in one code base? And I guess one of the major things for me is that this type safety. I understand that it's not for everyone, and I love Rails as well, but I do love having the end-to-end type safe calls. It just makes coding and the suggestions and all that just so much easier. So we have decided to use tRPC in this one. We will have a monorepo. So with Tamagui, we can set up a monorepo, which has basically our web app, which runs as our server. So that'll be the Next.js running serverless API with tRPC endpoint. And then we will have a Expo repo, which is basically a wrapper around React Native. It just provides a whole bunch of utility. And that will run our native app. Okay, so we decided, and by using tRPC, we can get code like all this code completion and type safety from on the web, on the server, and on the Expo app. So that's hard to look past, right? Also, just fallen in love with deploying to Vercel just for the ease of use compared to what we have to normally do. We have a very complicated stack at work. Which, with Rails, Kubernetes, just all that work that just disappears. And that is just beauty. The ability to roll back instantly, which we've actually used a few times already, just getting that out of the box, I'm still struggling to find that with, a different platform for Rails. It's one thing that I'd love to see happen in the future, and maybe something we can work on. So that's a tRPC. So let's keep moving. Okay, so the other piece, or the major piece of the puzzle, I guess, that we were looking for is when using React Native, I would love to just use everything we've been using. That would just make life so much easier. Unfortunately, we can't, just because of the way that everything is compiled. We're running on a native device. We just don't have access to all the web features. So a lot of things just don't work, unfortunately. So we miss out on our chakra, which is, how I feel about chakra. So we had to look for a different library that supported this. And we came across Tamagui. It's an up-and-comer, so there is a risk here to using it. It might fall away in the future. But looking at the community, it seems to be, they seem to be cranking on this at the moment. 4 hours ago, we had an update. It's very active, and there are a lot of starter kits being built on this right now, which we also evaluated. And like I said, they just didn't have what we wanted. I want a specific stack. And the only way to do that, or the easiest way I wanted to do that, was to just start as low level as we could, which was using just a Tamagui mono repo and then adding the pieces in. But Tamagui is a unified React Native and web component library. So they give us a whole bunch of components that we can use. So for instance, just like Chakra, buttons, we can use this button component, drop it in, and then we can use that same button on the web and on native. So we can build things once. Now, keeping in mind, I mean, this thing allows you to even build screens. So you build one screen, it uses a thing called Solito for navigation, but we can do that. But what we kind of think is that the web and the native app will have a different feel, like they have different purposes, right? Like for instance, when you log into this app on the web, we've got this big post style add your build. On a native app, you're not going to do that because you've logged in. We know you've logged in. So you're going to have a nav here. So things will look different, but some things will be shared, right? Like your button styles, your themes. We're even going to be able to do dark mode, light mode, which is like a quite nice feature. Things like this, like a tile would probably be shared as well. And tags. So as you go, there's going to be a benefit to being able to write once. Okay, so that's what Tamagui is going to provide us, along with all its different components, right? So it has like dialogues, popovers, and all these kind of things. I mean, we just can write this thing once, and it works both ways. All right. What else does Tamagui give us? Oh, yep, that's a good one. So Tamagui, when you use their starter kit, the way that it structures the monorepo is quite cool. So we get our two apps, we get our web and our native. Then we also get packages. And inside the packages is where we can define our APIs. It's where we can define our database, being Prisma. That's one that we need to talk about as well. And it also creates the UI library. And this is a really cool practice, is actually having your UI component library pulled out to the side. So rather than being like import box from Chakra, you'd be import box from my UI. And what that allows you to do over time is if you want to ever pull away, let's call it, you want to move away from Tamagui, you want to move away from Chakra, you can just change your component library and you don't have to change any imports in your app. As long as your new UI library exports the same component box, you can swap out the library behind the scenes. And that actually happens. Like we've done that a few times. We've been stuck in using a library and wanted to get out and eject. And the clean way to do that is have your own component library that exports from the base library. And this is exactly how Tamagui sets up the repo, which is really nice. Okay, that's Tamagui. Finally, last but not least, for sure, is Prisma. So we know Prisma. I really like Prisma. Yes, it can be slow, but they have put a lot of effort into making it faster. There are things like Drizzle, Keasley, all the other guys, they're all starting up. But I like Prisma because they are very mature. And I took a gamble and I said, well, you're this big, you're not going to just sit on your hands and let everyone overtake you. So that's exactly what they've been doing with version 5. I think it's version 5 upwards. They've just been punching the performance improvements, right? So let's see, Prisma, here's the base. What are they up to now? Here, 5.3. And look, 17 hours ago, new update. So they are working hard. That's another reason why we needed to build our own, because a lot of the new frameworks using Tamagui and stuff are using other ORMs. And because we've written so much already, we don't want to rewrite that. We want to basically just drop our API from current my 4x4 straight into my 4x4 monorepo and just work, because there's so many hours of work there that we do not want to redo. So a little bit of lock-in, but I think this is a great library anyway. All right, let's roll. So to get started, Tamagui.dev docs intro installation. So it's just here, installation. We're going to run npm create Tamagui latest. Okay, so let's chuck that in there. It's going to ask you to install Tamagui. If you haven't done this before, just say yes. So the project name is going to be a demo monorepo. All right. So we're going to get an option here to pick a template. So you can do simple web, not production ready, very simple. Don't not for us. Takeout, it's like a very cool thing that they've built, like a starter pack for a production app. Definitely have a look at that if you are interested. So they build a whole bunch of screens and assets and testing and everything for you, and it's costs a bit of money, but it's going to save you a lot of time. All right, that's that one. But we don't want that one. We just want the Next Expo Solito production ready universal app with the monorepo, right? So we hit, let's do that. Do we want to use Git? What kind of question is that? Of course we do. So we're going to just let that thing run. Let it do its thing. So now you can see this is something that's quite different to normally, is because we're working now with workspaces and Yarn. You can see it's a little bit of a different style that you're going to see happening with all our steps, which is quite cool. You can also usually see here, it does like quite a nice cleanup, and it gives quite a good bit amount of info, and it's also using Turbo. So Turbo is something, while this runs, I can quickly show you. So Turbo, what do we say? Turbo.js. It's Vercel, so let's just see. Turbo build here. All right, so Vercel acquired this, but it just helps build, and it's a bundler for monorepos, right? For JavaScript and TypeScript. And it just does, it's got a whole bunch of functionality just to make things faster. Incremental builds, caching, a whole bunch of features. You can have a look at that. And that just helps. It's part of this thing here. So you can see there, Turbo. We've got ES build, and then it's cloning this workspace here and Vercel. All right. So one of the next steps, it's telling us here, CD into demo monorepo. Now we can run yarn web, right? And that's going to roll up and build our web version. So this is our normal Next.js app that we'll be using. So this is what we're all familiar with, right? So once that builds, and also here's a nice cool thing. If you want to ever upgrade Tamagui, you just run that command. Very easy, all right? So let's see, have you told us what you're doing? Here it is. So if we run that, we will have our Tamagui. Boom, done. Now I'm going to open a new tab here, and I'm going to run yarn native, and that's going to kick off all of our bundler. And we want to say we want to open iOS because that's what we have, and now it'll open this up on our iPhone emulator once it's all built. All right. So if you haven't done any React Native dev work, this is one of the cool things. There's a lot of waiting. All right. So anyway, so for now, let's look at this. So we got our Tamagui app here, and it's very simple. It's got a little functionality, a link to a user, go home, and it's got a little popover, right? And that's it. All right. That's all we're getting for now. So what I want to do as well is I am going to open up this code base. Now, let me just pump up this size. All right, so let's look at this. Let's have a walkthrough of this code here. So you can see in this base here, we've got our turbo file, not too important for us right now, our TypeScript config, right? So that you will notice in a package like this, in a monorepo, we're gonna have multiple type tiers configs. So you can see here, there's a path here. This is called for us as app, which is in packages app. And then we have our UI, which is my UI. And as you can call this whatever you want. Just make sure you rename through the repo. But that just links to UI. So whenever you import a component, you want to call it a box from my UI or a button, you will use this. Okay? One cool thing that I've learnt from monorepos, when you are defining or calling these things in, so app, right? You need to have a package in here, and you will have a package.json file. So every package has a package.json file, and that is the name of this app here, right? So it is important that you do this, because when you want to import, you need to have this so that the repo knows. And you can see here, the dependency is my UI, right? here. That doesn't exist in NPM. That exists locally. So if we look in here, we have a name MyUI, version 001, right? So that's how you reference packages within the same repo. So it looks like it's an external repo, but it's actually defined locally. And it's through this name here. Okay, and that's how the monorepo knows where to look. Now, let's start in the app package. So we'll start in the package.json just so we can see what's going on here. All right, so let me just walk through what's happening in this package.json here. So like I said, we're importing the MyUI, so that's our UI comp library. Then we're getting all the Tamagui stuff. We're just pulling in the latest. Burnt, which is just like Toast, but a cross-platform, so it can do web or native. And then some Expo stuff, and then Solito. So let's have a quick look at Solito. So Solito is so what he just says is a missing piece. So what it is, it's a tiny wrapper around React Native, React Navigation, sorry, and Next.js. And it's got a couple of patterns there for building cross-platform apps. So it's mainly, like, you mainly use this for linking, right? So it's like the ability to use this link component and use router across Next and Expo. Very cool. So that's what we've got in the app, right? So those are the dependencies we're looking there, and we've got our dev dependencies here. Okay. The index, nothing of interest really. But here we have two things. Let's jump in the Tamagui config. So this is where we can define, I think they're just doing types here, but they're pulling in the config and they're just re-exporting it from MyUI, which is in here. So we'll go through Tamagui config in the next steps. But for this one, we're going to look at provider. So what is the provider? This is just the context provider, and this is going to be shared across platform. So Next or native, Expo. And what you can see, and this is a really cool thing that we need to pay attention to when we're building a monorepo like this or using these tools, is you can see here we're importing Toast viewport from Toast viewport, right? Which is this file here. But if you notice, there's a web file here too. And now this is very clever, because what this does is, if we're running on Expo or React Native, you can see we're using safe insets from React Native safe area context. Obviously that doesn't work on web. But then we have Toast viewport from the web. So we can have two different files, one for native, one for web. And depending on what platform we're running on, it's going to import from there. So that's something to keep in mind and very cool to see. And then, so just when you import, it just pulls in like that. Okay. So what is this doing? It's just a Tamagui provider. It's got a Toast provider and the custom Toast, and then it just puts in the children there. And that's the provider. And this provider will get used if we look at Next and we look at the pages. I think it's used in the app here. Here we go. So you can see here we pulled this in, this provider, and that's here, right? So we're using that to wrap the entire app. And it also happens inside of Expo. So in Expo, this is the React Native version. We're wrapping everything in a provider. So anything that we need to pass context through, so just think of these things like tRPC that needs its tRPC context. Think of your auth. So you're going to do we're going to do a kind provider, which is the auth provider that will also live in the provider. Okay. So that's all that. Next, packages provider. Now, this is a piece that I know is a convention, I guess, but it doesn't sit so good with me. Just confusing, I think, sometimes for me personally. So we tend to rename this folder, but this is your features, or in other words, screens. I refer to them as screens. It makes more logical sense in my brain, also with the team that we're working on. So we've renamed this folder screens, but in this instance, it's called features out of the box. Now what this is this is the home screen. All right. So they have features, home, screen. Now, what we would normally do would be screens, home, index. That's just how I like it, but everyone can do whatever they feel. Now, you can see here we've written one home screen, and it's using the use link from Solito, crop platform, React, and here we're importing from our UI. Okay. All these different things. These are components provided by Tamagui directly. All of these are direct components. Now you can see a bit different to what we normally do with Chakra. We normally expect to see a flex, or if you're using Tailwind, it would be like a div with the class name flex. But in this world, when we need to think about native, we use Y stacks or X stacks for horizontal. And then we just got normal components that you're very used to seeing. These are shorthands, so for like text align. All right, these are equivalent. So it's got all the nice little things you're used to seeing. And here we go. So you can see here, let's just close off this. I'll bring this guy across. So we're looking at the home screen. So if we say welcome to Tamagui, and we could just say hello from Tamagui. Hot reloaded, all right, on native, on web. So we haven't done anything, and we're just getting all this for free. So now you can literally build one screen, one time, fully responsive, and it will show across native, and it will show across web. And you can see this is why we have chosen to go this route. Save time. There's a learning curve, which we will go through over time. But this is just makes things so much easier. Rather than having a team work on this and a team work on this, and then you add a feature to here, and then you forget to do it on the web, and web becomes lame. We want to make sure that these two things live together. Now, I'll show you, so that's the screen for home, but then how do we implement this in Next? So in Next, we're still using the pages directory just because there's a few little hiccups with the app at this stage. But if we look at the index, super simple, right? This is not what we're used to seeing. But what we're doing here is import home screen from app features home screen, which is the one we've just been in, and you literally just pop it right there. And that's it. Now we got our next gear. So this is for the web. And then we export our home screen. Now, what does that look like on Expo? App, index. Now this is the Expo equivalent. We've got app features home screen, same spot. And now we're importing a stack from Expo router. And this is our stack screen. And here's where we title our stack. So that's home. So we can say not home. Right there. So that's what's controlling this. And then we're just pumping out our home screen again. Right? And that's it. So that's the basic layout of this monorepo. And we will work through this as we go and add in all our different pieces. We will work through and find how to lay this out so that it just works cross-platform. It's very cool. I have used a couple of other starter kits as inspo to see how we can do these things. So basically that sums up what the repo, the starter repo looks like, okay? And I guess some of the decisions that we made that we wanted to implement. So in the next video, we'll start walking through adding auth, tRPC, and all the rest of the bits and pieces, the folder structure that I want to use. So that is going to be a big one. But stay tuned, subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.